Hi, everyone. I thought I'd make some videos about our Sunday school class. I want to catch us up. I'm sorry we can't meet in person, but we're going to try these videos I'm going to send on emails. If you have any questions about the section that we're looking at, you can always email back and I'll try to answer those at our next video. So we're looking at March 22nd, and we've been covering for that week, we covered Judges 11 through 1 Samuel chapter 7. And I wanted to share some of the observations I made. And I'm going to have a copy of my notes and the handout that I usually do for class 2 on the email as well. So the first thing I noticed was that God uses sinful decisions to accomplish his purpose. And of course, Samson is the example of that. And we see him taking a Philistine for a wife, touching a dead body, which would make him unclean. And of course, he was supposed to have a Nazarene vow from birth, and he did everything against that vow that he had made. And we also see he killed 30 Philistines to take clothes, and see God's using these sinful decisions that he makes and puts them in these situations, and God uses those to punish the Philistines. He burned the Philistines' grain, vineyards, and olive groves, with that tying the foxes' tails together with the torches. He attacked the great slaughter of the Philistines. He killed 1,000 Philistines with jawbone. He was with a harlot, which of course was a very sinful, bad decision, but God used that. He pulled the gates and posts, carried to the top of the hill when the Philistines tried to encircle him and attack him. He loved Delilah, who's a Philistine, fell in love with her. And then he killed 3,000 people by collapsing the temple. And I'm going to pick 2 verses that I'm going to read and spend a little more time on. This is just kind of an overview right now. The other observation I noticed was the depths of corruption in Israel. And Judges shows this, again, because there was no king, that they, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. We see this spiral down. First one, we see Jephthah sacrifices his daughter because of an oath to assure victory. And at first, it just seems like an innocent mistake, but what did he think would come out of his house? And what this tells me, it doesn't specifically say it, but what it tells me is that he was influenced by the nations around them, like God had warned the Israelites not to let happen, because they would try to convince their God to do things in their favor for them by offering their children as sacrifice, and God told them never to do that. So we see Jephthah does this, makes this rash vow, so to speak. And then we also see Micah makes household idols and consecrates a son to be the priest, his son to be the priest of these idols. And then, of course, the phrase, there was no king, and I look at that as there was no leadership. So everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And we see that 3 times in Judges. And I'll have my notes so you can look at the Bible verses that I'm referencing. Micah convinces a Levite to become his priest over his household gods or idols. And of course, Levites were never to do that sort of thing. But we see this spiral happening in Israel. It just gets worse. And then the Danites, which was the tribe of Dan, they stole Micah's household gods and the Levitical priest and ran off with them. And then we see the wickedness of the Benjamites at Gibeah, that the concubine was raped and murdered. And what was really shocking about this too was that the Benjamites actually defended against this evil. As you remember, the other tribes came up to them and said, hey, this is wicked, despicable, you need to bring these men out so we can get justice. And they instead defended their actions and fought against the other tribes. The other thing I saw in our section is this kindness shown in Israel, which is pretty cool. And we see this in the contrast of the dark contrast of the book of Judges. The book of Ruth shows us this amazing kindness, or the word hesed, that we'll look at in a little bit. So we see Ruth is kind to Naomi, and that's in Ruth 1:16-17. And then we see Boaz is kind to both Ruth and Naomi. And then, of course, God is kind to Naomi. And we're going to look at that in a little bit. And I think I started on page 2. So we'll just go back to page 1, back up to Judges 11. And we'd referenced this before, but the Spirit of the Lord came upon. In the Old Testament, we see the idea of God's Spirit coming on people to do miraculous expressions or things. It's actually something people can observe. So we see this happening to Jephthah in battle, Samson, in 3 or 4 different occasions. We also talked, I think last time we were together in person, about the leadership transition in the book of Judges. They didn't really have any transitional plan. The judge or the leader would just die, and then God would have to raise up someone else. And we see that, of course, happening with Jephthah, who judged Israel 6 years and then died, and then Ibzan, and then Elon, Abdon, and Samson, and all of them have references to them dying and then God needing to raise up another one. Of course, I like figures of speech that I saw in this section. Delivered into or out of the hand of, that description brought me very low, did evil in the sight of the Lord. And we mentioned that the last time we were together too, that God has a perspective too, not just other people. She pressed him, plowed with my heifer, which is kind of an interesting figure of speech, and then attacked them hip and thigh. A lot of the modern versions leave that out. But the King James Version, which I was actually using the Gideon Bible because we didn't have internet access in California when I was putting this together. But I thought that was an interesting figure of speech, the attack them hip and thigh, which is simply a way to say it was a very overwhelming defeat or blow or attack. I also saw this section on prayer, which was really neat. Manoah, Samson, the children of Israel, and then Hannah. And what was really neat about Hannah is we see that she's praying for a child, and Eli the priest thinks she's drunk because she's talking out loud, and it's really touching how she says, no, this is just the sadness of heart. And I like that because like us, Hannah understands what it's like to be in pain or to grieve or suffer a loss, and God loves to hear from us no matter what's going on. So a few things I wanted to point out. I wanted to look at a little more closely. That one section I mentioned before, God uses sinful decisions to accomplish his purpose. And wanted to read a couple of verses from Judges about this. Judges 16:23. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. And of course, we know that because Samson made these decisions, these sinful decisions, that is why he was delivered, not because God had failed Samson or that Dagon had delivered them, because Dagon, of course, doesn't exist. He's an idol. And then Judges 16:27-30. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there. And on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Of course, they put his eyes out. Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. So we see Samson praying, even though he's made some really bad decisions. He's sinned against God, and that's why he's in this situation. He's asking God to use his life to accomplish his purposes. And of course, God allows him to do that. Then he pushes with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. So we see God using flawed and sinful people to accomplish his purposes. And in contrast to that, we see this kindness in Israel, especially in the book of Ruth. And I love this kindness that God shows to Naomi. And at first, it starts out like God is being not kind to her. And of course, we see this, Ruth chapter 1, verse 20-21. Don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. She's talking about her 2 sons and her husband all passing away and her living in a foreign land. Got a little wind here. Almost done. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. And then I love how they go back to Bethlehem. And the irony in the book is that Bethlehem means Bet Lechem in Hebrew, which it means house of bread. And the irony is that they had to leave the house of bread because there was a famine. And then God brings them back to Bethlehem. And we see Ruth chapter 2, verse 20. The Lord bless him, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. She added, that man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers. So the word kindness here, or chesed, is this word that God uses to describe himself, this loving kindness, unfailing love kind of a thing. And we see Ruth starting to see this kindness that she had missed out on earlier in her life because of Boaz, how he had helped given her grain and giving her Ruth safe passage in his field. Ruth chapter 4, verse 14 to 17. The women said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And of course, we know that Jesus comes later on through this line. So it's just a beautiful picture of how things start off bad, but God redeems, shows kindness, and brings life back to Naomi. We'll see you next time. God bless.